Today on Mormon Times, remembering September 11th, 10 years later, stories of faith, hope, and healing.
Even in America's darkest moment, the mere act of rising a flag, which is the symbol of one nation under God, can be an uplifting experience and give hope.
Utah sculptor Stan Watts creates a memorial to honor the fallen from 9/11.
I'm going to go to the World Trade Center in the morning.
One Utah family avoids the tragedy when they accidentally slept in. A split-second decision they say saved their lives, and professional advice for making sense of tragedy. Questions that help you cope. Good morning and welcome to Mormon Times. Ask anyone where they were 10 years ago during the terrorist attacks on 9/11, and most likely they'll remember it in vivid detail. Experiences both tragic and miraculous from that fateful day are still being shared. Today we highlight some of the positive stories of healing and of faith that came as a result of that day. Rising through the tons of rubble in the aftermath of 9/11, through the debris and thick gray dust, waved our nation's red, white, and blue.
And I think that the whole nation as a whole felt something go here, and they remember where they were, not only when 9/11 happened, but where they were when they saw this flag rising on the rubble. Even in America's darkest moment, the mere act of rising a flag, which is the symbol of one nation under God, can be an uplifting experience and give hope. And so it's my responsibility on this 10th anniversary to make that same statement.
So Utah sculptor Stan Watts made it his mission to remember those who gave their lives to save others 10 years ago. His idea was to sculpt the 3 firemen who raised the flag to honor the fallen at Ground Zero.
Back here in Utah, it felt like New York was so far away that they were almost in a foreign land until the day that we saw that picture of the 3 firemen raising the flag on the pile of rubble. And then it brought home the fact that this was us. And it also, to me, it brought the fact that it's going to be okay, because the flag, to me, is a symbol of one nation under God.
Watts has a history of sculpting men of God. His work of George Washington in prayer currently rests at Valley Forge. He sculpted Abraham Lincoln uttering the words, "Under God." 2 of his favorite works are Joseph and Hiram Smith riding from Nauvoo to Carthage, and this powerful piece of the Good Samaritan.
One of the things that my teacher Aberd taught me was you can only do so many monuments in your life, and so don't waste your time here on earth doing fodder. Work on things that matter.
What matters to Watts today is honoring those from 9/11, but getting his project approved proved extremely difficult. The 3 firemen did not want the piece to be about them.
I said, "Why did you raise that flag?" And they said, with boldness, you know, to honor the real heroes, those men that answered the call and ran up the stairs. It's not that you're firemen, it's not that it's you, but if you were just average people that had raised the flag, the country needed that. We needed to see in the pile of these ashes some glimmer of hope.
Watts hopes his work, called To Lift a Nation, will bring hope to those who see it. Stan says this is his personal testimony of God and his love of the red, white, and blue. Work, he says, was not his alone.
Whenever we go off and try to do our own work and try to acclaim our own glories, it doesn't amount to anything. But as long as we're on the side of righteousness, we have the ability to access the power of God because we're doing his work. And imagine if you could bear your testimony in something that will last for thousands of years.
Watts has 2 of his memorials on display currently. The first one, standing 22 feet tall, is in Emmitsburg, Maryland at the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial, and the second one was unveiled yesterday at Sandy City Hall. Well, 10 years ago, Brent Belnap was a young husband and father working on Wall Street. At that time, he was serving as the state president in Manhattan. He remembers that day as if it were yesterday, and he joins us now via Skype. Brent, I need to ask you, where were you when you first heard of the tragedy going on there on 9/11?
I was on my way to work. I was actually underground at about Fulton Street Station, which was 1 stop away from where I normally would have gotten out of work that day, which was the Wall Street Station near Trinity Church. And I was underground when, on the subway, when we felt a jolt, and train moved on one more station to Wall Street, which is where I got out of work that day. And then when I surfaced out of the ground, still not knowing what had happened, I happened to have looked up behind me, which was toward the World Trade Centers, and could see at that time the South Tower was on fire, had been hit by something, didn't know it was a plane at that time. But there was all of this paper that was fluttering down. I sort of, my first thought was that it was a ticker tape parade. But then I thought, no, it's September. The Yankees haven't won the World Series again, so it must be something else. And I bent down and I looked at the papers that were fluttering and landing on the ground, and saw that they were like people's resumes and company documents, contracts. I'm a lawyer, and I thought this stuff shouldn't be floating around. This is proprietary information for businesses that are in the World Trade Center. But there was one thing that I think was a real prompting. My natural inclination would have been to stay and watch this disaster, not knowing it was a terrorist attack, but this fire unfold. And I felt the most unmistakable push on my shoulder. It wasn't harsh, but it was clear. It was unmistakable. Move, go, get out of there.
Once you realized how bad this really was, as the stake president, what was your first response to your stake and your members?
As stake president, I was concerned that the church was going to basically shrivel up and die here in New York. We just created a ward in Lower Manhattan, which is where Ground Zero is. We just built a building in the northern end of the island. We had other things underway on the drawing board. The church was starting to gain some traction here in New York City. And after the September 11th attacks, I thought, man, all of this is just going to come to an end. People are going to leave. We actually noticed, starting that very first Sunday after 9/11, we had people who had been contacted during the days before through phone trees to make sure that all of our members were safe. And we'd done that within about 48 hours. Approximately 3,000 members of the church had been contacted here on the island of Manhattan and confirmed that they were alive, that nobody had been killed in the disaster. A number of people who we hadn't seen for a long time actually were starting to come back. For a while, actually, we called them 9/11 saints, members of the church who previously had not been active, who after the disaster started to come back.
Tell us, when you went back to church that first Sunday, Brent, what was the mood of the members at that time?
Very somber. The mood was very somber. We decided to have business as usual, so we still had a word conference that day. The bishop was asked to speak, and the meeting, I just remember starting out very sad. But he gave some of the most inspiring remarks, and the whole tone of the meeting was, this terrible thing is hit, and even then it hadn't really dawned on us what had happened fully, but it was, yeah, we're going to get through this.
Looking back, Brent, the last 10 years, how do you think this event back there maybe affected your faith and affected the saints as well?
You know, when I look back on September 11th, I cannot, to this day, really watch the images of the planes hitting the towers. That's something I don't want to see. But one of the real highlights, I guess, if you could put a silver lining around a very dark cloud, is that, frankly, in hindsight, the time after the 9/11 attacks was one of the best times for the church here in New York City. I can't think of September 11th and not connect it with the arrival of the temple in Manhattan.
Brent, thank you so much for sharing your perspective, being there on that day, and we appreciate you joining us this morning.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
coming up next, a Utah family on vacation in New York City on 9/11, but an uncharacteristic split decision kept them from being at the World Trade Center that morning. And when tragedy strikes, what happens to people's faith? We'll examine why God lets bad things happen to good people.